of the tangibility of those assets, you can really borrow and leverage up against
of realism and tangibility to the virtual space. Just imagine how desolate Skyrim.
They got a physical stock certificate that actually showed tangibility to what was heretofore an intangible.
Simulate real-world objects can still hint at that tangibility. These are your cards.
Things are moving on the screen. You create tangibility and familiarity to animations. And
there's also just a tangibility to this place.
It doesn't give you that tangibility of how is my arc.
The solid parcel of Earth supporting the watch represents the tangibility of earthly existence. In addition to serving,
they have some sense of tangibility about them. You can see whether
but a lucid tangibility. With the stereoscope, one is confronted not with a
tangibility and the intangibility of information and data, I think, is one barrier, and then the securing your path.
That kind of thing, because it has tangibility. There's an actual document. This actually happened.
Get some numbers and some tangibility, and so that's kind of one way.
It's got a quality, a tangibility about it, and yet it's formless and empty at the same time, full of itself.
So the takeaway really is motion plus tangibility equals a more understandable UI for your users.
So I wanted to give you a brief mental model of what this release and this process of actually implementing material design was to me. Actually making this work within our team, getting the pixels actually showing up on the screen that represents the design. The process is basically taking the ideas that UX has, that the design team has, where there are these grand ideas and there's paradigms and there's systems and there's languages and there's all this nice stuff that they come up with, and then actually translating into the technical details of the functionality that engineers actually need to write applications that are going to deliver that. So the way I picture it, so we had this huge design team, so we have access to great artists, and we could ask them to come up with art that sort of represents this, or I could actually just draw it myself. This obviously is an artist waving his hands furiously and coming up with beautiful rainbows and wonderful things. You can tell it's an artist because there's a beret involved. Either that or they're French. So we take the design ideas that are sort of floating up in the air and incredibly vague when engineers get in the room and get a really puzzled look on their face, kind of wondering what all this stuff is. When they say language in the context of applications, it doesn't make sense. So then
that means Java, right?
I think so. I think it means the Java programming language. We'll talk to the UX team after this and sort of nail that down. But the idea really is to take the concrete elements and figure out what they actually mean by all the hand waving when they're talking about floating action buttons, when they're talking about ink and paper, and actually translating it into the particular elements that we need in the platform to give you those capabilities. The way I think of it is, I think it's like the Nyquist sampling theorem says that there's a frequency at which you can sample a curve such that you can then reconstruct the original curve. And I won't get into technical details because I don't understand them, but it's the same idea here. If UX is creating this beautiful spatial curve of the design language and the pattern they're coming up with, and what you want to do is implement enough functionality that they actually get what they wanted, even though they had a hard time sort of describing it in terms of the crisp elements that you needed. So what we did on the toolkit team was to translate that into the features and the functionality that we needed to expose those capabilities. And this boiled down to the features that we're going to talk about in the next few minutes. We have the ability to